Welcome back to the Grow Like a Mother podcast. If you've been around for a while, you know that I'm all about helping you reclaim your time and protect your energy. One of the most powerful tools we have for doing that is boundaries. But boundaries aren't just about saying no or drawing a hard line. Today, we're taking a deeper look at the relationship between boundaries, time, and energy with my guest, Steph Koenig. She is a coach, a wife, a mom of two who brings nearly 30 years of lived and professional experience helping women shift out of overwhelm and into confidence, starting with how they manage their commitments. In this episode, Steph takes us into a really fresh and insightful framework, the four boundary confidence types, which is the explorer, the architect, the juggler, and the trailblazer. And instead of one size fits all advice, this approach really helps you understand why certain boundaries feel hard for you and what your personal style says about how you protect your time and energy. So, whether you're someone who overbooks or avoids conflict or just finds yourself drained at the end of the day without really knowing why, this conversation is going to give you a new lens to see what's really going on and what to do about it. So, let's dive in, find out what your boundary type is and how it can help you finally feel more in control of your time, energy, and emotional bandwidth. Welcome, Steph. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thanks, Jill. It's so great to be here.
Yeah, I just finished taking your quiz. I am the juggler type, which really spoke to me. I think that this is a fun way to get people introduced to the idea of thinking about boundaries, because it can be hard. It can be hard work, quote, work, right? That people need to do. And I'm curious how you've, like, what's the story about how you found yourself doing this and supporting women in this way?
Oh, absolutely. Well, as you said in the intro, I have been in corporate America for 30 years, 16 of them as a working mom. And I will say, probably about 10 years ago, I really hit a wall. And it was because I had really subscribed to the supermom myth that I'm supposed to be able to do everything. I'm supposed to put everybody else first, despite what I need, despite what I want. And in that time, I lost myself. I didn't know what I loved to do, what I wanted to do, who I was anymore. I just was a mom. And I think that in order to be the best mom we can be, we have to be more than a mom. And when I hit that realization, I was like, whoa, I really have to do something. Something's got to give. This isn't right. And I found a life coach and joined a women's program full of women just like myself, trying to find their way after having lost themselves in motherhood. And during that process, I learned about boundaries. And the thing I learned that blew my mind about boundaries was that a boundary is not about controlling other people. It's about controlling what you can do and what you have in you, how you react to certain situations, how you feel about different circumstances, not about changing anybody else. And I realized I was spending my entire life trying to control everybody else. And all the circumstances around me when I had so much power in myself to tap into. And the minute I did that, I just started to grow exponentially. My confidence grew. I had more time for myself. Self-care became a priority. And now here I am, 10 years later, and I'm dedicated to helping other women find the same path.
I love that. It's so fun that we often will start to teach and move into work that we wish we had access to when we were going through it, right? I can relate to that story so much, and many of the listeners can too, in that we are so focused and caring and conscious about how we show up in motherhood that it can become our whole life, and that feels maybe doable or fun or good for a time, and then there becomes a time where you realize, oh wait, where am I? And I think that's a really familiar feeling. And it's cool to see that like you were in this program with so many other people who are in the same boat because now we're talking about it, right? Now we're able to more openly come in conversation as moms and say like, no, we need to set some boundaries here so that we can create the life that we want and make some time for ourselves, right? And
Absolutely.
can you give us a rundown? I'm super curious to know about the different types now that I've taken the quiz. Can you give us like a brief breakdown of the different types of like boundary personalities and um, maybe like why it's important for us to know our type? Let's start there and then you can walk us through the types.
Yes. So I think the biggest takeaway is that boundaries are not a one size fits all approach. So you have to understand, it's about understanding where you are and having clarity of self what your values are, what your needs are, what you want, and then where you're at in terms of your confidence in expressing that. And the boundary clarity or confidence types are really about figuring out where you are on that continuum as a person, as a mom, as just a whole human being. And I think that depending on where you are in the continuum, different challenges are being faced. You have different strengths in those times of your life, and you can grow from there from one boundary type to another. So that's what's an interesting thing about it, is that you can kind of go from a boundary explorer all the way up to a trailblazer over time. And you can kind of slip backwards as well, depending on where you're at in the season of your life, because it's like a garden. If you don't tend it, it's not going to grow. So the way I see these types are a starting point for you to understand where you need the most support. And I can serve up, based on when I use the quiz to identify where you're at, I can serve up the right resources and tools to help you from where you're at.
Yeah, it makes sense. We need to personalize it based on our specifics. We can't have that one size fits all approach. It doesn't exist. It's not helpful. Even if it did exist, it wouldn't be helpful for everyone. So knowing our type is the first place. And it sounds like each type is sort of like a step along the way to achieving really good boundaries. And so that's good to know too. So it's not just that there are different types, it's that depending on your type, it helps you identify what work there is to do. And so walk us through the types.
Sure. So the first type is the explorer. This is your baseline. You're at the start of your journey. You may know what boundaries are or have just learned that there's such a thing as boundaries, but you're not really sure how to apply them or really what they are. So when you're in this phase of the journey, you are in learning mode. You need to become more aware of what boundaries are, what they are not, how to use them in general. And then it's also about understanding inside where you're at, what your values are, getting clear on what you really need. And then finally, in this stage, it's about taking baby steps, starting small, practicing small boundaries across different times of your day to really start to build that confidence.
Okay, I've been there for sure.
Yeah.
What's the next stage?
Yes, the next stage is the architect, and this is a boundary builder. So you've got the foundation. You've built the foundation as a boundary explorer. You've learned a lot about boundaries. You've started to practice them and build some confidence there. But as a builder, you still need to start moving into more clarity of the boundaries themselves. So getting more practice in learning how to be very clear in how you create your boundaries and how you communicate your boundaries. So clear communication, making sure you are communicating, because the idea is the same as if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, did it make a sound? If you don't communicate your boundaries, nobody's going to really understand that that's where you stand. And then the last thing that boundary architects really need to focus in on is handling pushback, because when you start building your boundaries and expressing your boundaries with others, they're not used to that and they may not handle it very well. And so they may push back. They may feel hurt. They may feel like it doesn't matter. They'll just keep breaking your boundaries. So learning how to really handle those situations and really build that confidence is really what you need to do as an architect.
Okay. Okay. And then the juggler is the next one.
The juggler. Now, I find that most moms are jugglers. I'm finding that that's the one that's coming up most of the time when moms take my quiz, because that's what we do. We're juggling all the things. And I think that once we're getting really good at setting boundaries, we're handling the pushback, we're really juggling those balls really well. But the thing that happens with jugglers is that we may be too inflexible with our boundaries, so that when um, a life throws us a curveball, we tend to let them slide. So it could be one, instance in your life that something just takes over and suddenly your boundaries are all out of whack because you just let them go. Or it's like a season, like for me, going from summer into school season in the fall, where suddenly all the sports are happening and the schedules completely blow up, finding that being a time when I tend to let some boundaries slide. So understanding those things are really important. And again, it's just about being flexible with those boundaries, understanding that sometimes you're not going to be able to hold the line every time. You're going to need to learn how to adjust as life throws those curveballs.
Yeah, I get those curveballs a lot. And sometimes sometimes it can feel easier just to let the boundaries slide. Like in my mind, I'm like, oh no, this is just, is just to make everyone's life easier. And then ultimately, I wish I had held the boundary. So I guess once you go from that point to being able to still hold the boundary, even when life is holding, like giving you chaos, then you achieve like trailblazer status. Is that kind of how that goes?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you get to be a trailblazer, I think that's the holy grail, right? You want to be in a place where you really are strong in your boundaries, but there are some watch outs when you're a trailblazer. And this is somewhere for me, I kind of vacillate between trailblazer and juggler. And what happens is as a trailblazer, sometimes we're so, again, firm in our boundaries that we may come off as too assertive, as bossy, as just too rigid, and understanding that being flexible is a good thing, but also leading by example is important too. So making sure that we are um, creating a boundary and projecting our boundaries in a way that is more inclusive and not disconnecting ourselves from other people, because that is a danger of boundaries that they're too rigid, is that you can isolate yourself. And that's a danger when you're in trailblazer mode. But as a trailblazer, you have the opportunity to lead, and you have the opportunity to lead by example and to really bring people along as learning their own boundaries and really having boundaries that work more like a dance than a wall. And that's a really great place to be. Also, as a trailblazer, you get to really dig into more complex boundary areas, especially in relationships where close relationships with your partner, especially because those are areas where it's very nuanced and it's really you're really dancing with other people's boundaries as well as your own in that case. And so that's a really kind of interesting zone to be in.
Hmm. Yeah, I like the way that you are giving us a fresh perspective on a boundary as not necessarily being a bad thing. It can be an opportunity for others to understand how to interact with us and how to move through life in this nuanced way. And one time I heard a boundary described more as an invitation and less than like a wall being put up. I often would feel like if I'm setting a boundary, it feels like I'm putting a wall up and saying no to you and keeping you out. But I had heard this perspective about if you set a boundary, you're telling people how to interact with you. You're telling them what works for you. So, like for instance, if you have a mother-in-law that wants to come over all the time and the baby's napping and you don't know how to say no, that's going to script your day. But if you put a boundary in place, that says you can't come between 1 and 3, let's say, but you can come at this time, or like, can you give me notice before you come? And so you're using the boundary to create this atmosphere of mutually beneficial relationship, which I really like.
Yeah, and the key to remember too, though, is that when you're setting that boundary, for using the mother-in-law example, they may not change their behavior. So you may have to have a consequence in place that says, okay, if my mother-in-law is going to come to the door without, calling ahead, I'm not going to answer the door,
Right.
and just this is it. This has got to be the harder line. And sometimes they need a few of those to learn that that's what's going to happen. And it's tough love in a way. It's not. And I think that the misconception that people who are running into your boundaries are finding is that when they get hurt, it's not that you're not hurting them. You're not hurting them intentionally. You're not doing it to make them feel bad. You're doing this so that you can be the best partner, mom, friend, daughter-in-law that you can be with them, because you cannot pour from an empty cup. And that's probably the biggest mindset shift that I learned as well as boundary builder, was that if I remember that I am doing this not just for my own well-being, but for the well-being of the people around me that I care about, then it really changes the game.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does. And I think women in general, and I say this all the time, are more likely to do the work and um learn mindset shifts and put in the effort if it does impact people other than themselves. Because if it's just for us, we're like, oh, yeah, I'm too busy for that, or I don't have that's not important enough. Like my own well-being is not important enough. But when it's like, oh, I can improve my relationship with my kids. Oh, I can strengthen my marriage. And oh, okay, now I see the value, which is so funny. Um, but I want to switch gears briefly and just sort of take us into the sweet spot of where I like to chat, which is time management. And I think boundaries are a really great way to be able to help us create a calendar that includes the things that we want, and gives us permission and structure to say no to things that we don't want. And I'm curious to know, is there a different way to look at it when we're talking about boundaries interpersonally and boundaries with our time?
Yeah. So boundaries, one of the things I like to say is that boundary, whenever you're making a boundary with someone else, you're really making a boundary with yourself as well. And I think when it comes to time management, those boundaries are really with yourself more than anything else. Because when you set a boundary around your time, it's up to you to hold it. It's up to you to make sure when I put that time block on my calendar that I'm going to use for myself, that you're not working over it and you don't blow past your own boundaries. So that's a big difference for me in terms of time management, is that that boundary is something that you have to make sure that you're holding that boundary, because nobody else is going to do that for you.
Hmm. Yeah, it's one of the things that I always offer people when they ask, like, yeah, but how do I find the time to do these things for myself? I'm like, you need to take it. You need to claim the time by setting some boundaries around what you're willing to do and what you're not going to do and what's important to you. And it all comes down to values. And that I feel like is a big piece behind boundaries as well, and understanding why it is that you have trouble with certain boundaries. Is that something that you teach with your clients as well, like the values?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Because so here's the thing. When I talk about boundaries, I think about it in three kind of phases. And it's all around clarity. The first phase is clarity of self. And that is where your values, what you want, what you need. And as we understand from my past experience, and I think from yours as well, was that you hit that point where you don't even know what those are. So getting that clarity internally of what your values are, what you need, what you want, what your priorities are, that's the first thing you need to do in order to be able to build a boundary, because without knowing those, you're not going to know what boundary to build. And then you need the clarity of what that boundary is. So what you're going to do in the situation. So clarity of action in to get and to protect those values. And then finally, that clarity of communication, putting it all together. I value this, so I am going to do that in order to protect it.
Mm, yeah. And with that, you can feel like I'm almost imagining the foundation being built as you're going through those three stages. It's like, yes, and I can feel strong and draw strength from this because I have built it intentionally for me and I've taken the time to figure out what's important. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you give us some examples for someone who may just be starting out, or maybe for people anywhere on the spectrum of your quiz, but some takeaways or some things that people could try today after they finish listening to us, if they're feeling like they're ready to dive into dipping their toe into boundary setting a little bit more?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I love your time, right? Time management. Just try one thing, block 10 minutes, small, start small. And I think that I like to call them tots. Try one thing. They're bite sized, they're little nuggets that you can try and just have a quick win. And so start small. Progress over perfection is so important. Do not think you have to do all of it. You can't be where I am 10 years after I started when you're on day one. And I think that's probably the biggest nugget that I would take away.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a really good reminder and great permission for us to start small. I like that TOTS. It's an easy one to remember. I'm going to add that to my toolbox for sure. And I imagine that you'll be sharing a whole bunch of like nuggets and information at the summit that's coming up in the next couple days. Can you tell us about that? What that's all about?
Sorry, Jill, you broke up for a second. I lost you.
Oh, no worries. I was saying that I imagine in the coming days when you're in the summit, you'll be giving us a lot of other nuggets and pieces of information. So, can you share a little bit about what the summit's all about?
Yes, absolutely. The summit is called the B Word. the Boundaries Summit. It is
Nice.
July 7th, and it'll be an all-day online virtual summit with lots of women coaches and holistic practitioners talking about different aspects of boundaries. And I'll be diving in probably more deeply into the confidence framework, but also into some real practical strategies for developing boundaries as you learn.
Yeah, that's so fun. Excuse me. I think that the more that we talk about it, the more we can get comfortable with the idea of setting boundaries, practicing our boundaries, having these like conversations with other people, and just doing it, just starting can sometimes feel like the hardest piece of it for a lot of people. So if you are someone listening and you are thinking that, yes, maybe I need some work, maybe I could use some support on my boundaries, reaching out to Steph is a really great way to get started because it's not something that we can necessarily do on our own easily, which is why many of us don't have the boundaries, because if it was easy, we would already be doing it, right? And so if you're feeling like you need some extra support, I would encourage you to go and take Steph's quiz as a starting point. Check out her website, her Instagram, all that's going to be in the show notes. So it's easy to click. But Steph, what is your favorite way to connect with people and to start that relationship?
Yes. Well, first and foremost, I love the quiz is absolutely fun. I would absolutely go there first, stephkoenig.com/quiz. But you can also connect with me on Instagram. I've got tons and tons of valuable information on my Insta account and on Facebook as well. And then if you'd like to book a boundary clarity call, you can find me again at stephkoenig.com/boundary clarity call, and we can take some time to see where you're at and how I might be able to help you.
I think that would be a really valuable thing. So if you're listening and you think you need a place to get started, go do that first and foremost, and get into Steph's world and start learning from her and sort of soaking it all up. I think that it's really important for us to immerse ourselves with the thing that we're trying to learn and just hear more about it, be in the energy of the people who are doing it and teaching it. And as we wrap today, I just want to see if there's anything that feels important to share, stuff that we haven't covered yet, or a piece of information or an idea that you just want everyone to make sure that they hear today.
Mm. I think that we as moms just need to trust ourselves and know that we want to do the best we can for the people in our world around us, and that means that we need to take care of ourselves. I think that is first and foremost. I said it before, I'll say it again. You cannot pour from an empty cup, but in fact, the better way is to fill your cup so far that it's overflowing and it's effortless to empty that cup around you.
Hmm. Yes, thank you. That feels really supportive. I so appreciate your time today and all of your wisdom and advice for sharing with us about the different types of boundaries and why we might be struggling with setting them or holding them and how it's so important to be able to personalize things. So thank you for being here. It's been an absolute joy, and I know all the listeners have really gotten a lot of great information today. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Jill. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. And for everyone still here with us listening, until next week, keep on growing like a mother.